So welcome. This is the fifth one of 6 as part of our Rescue, Reuse, Regenerate, Reviving Town Centres, the online series that we're doing with the Heritage Trust Network. And we've already had 4 absolutely fascinating talks. So hopefully Malcolm will also be absolutely fantastic for us today. As you all know, the Heritage Trust Network is a not-for-profit organisation, and we work all across the UK with over 800 members, and bringing together people who very much want to restore, regenerate, maintain historic assets such as structures, buildings, places, all of that kind of thing. So if you ever want to find out more about what we do, the Heritage Trust Network do have a online introduction. It's once a month, I think, for people for just half an hour online, just to find out a bit more about the Heritage Trust Network. So if you're interested in doing that, make sure you sign up for those.
This Wednesday is the next one.
Oh, this Wednesday, even better. Fabulous. Bev, put a link in the chat for us ready so that people can access that. It's worth just half an hour just for you to jump on, just to find out a bit more, because we are very much a network. So it's about connecting people as well, which is the most important thing for us as well. So online etiquette, as always. I know, I apologize, it's like teaching you to suck eggs, but if you could please all remain muted throughout the presentation, that would be greatly appreciated. And we can, if you've got any questions at all throughout, please pop those in the chat box, and we can put those all to Malcolm at the end. But obviously, if you're not quite happy with the chat box, we can unmute people at the end as well, so we can start those discussions. But scroll them down. If you're anything like me, I forget them the minute I think of them, so make sure you scroll them down ready so that we can ask Malcolm at the end. And as always, we are happy for you to turn your camera off. We don't need to see you. We will see Malcolm, obviously, because he'll be presenting, and we may ask you at the end just to come on your camera, just so we can get a nice little photo for the funders, just to show that you were really here, and that we've obviously pulled you all together for this talk today. Now, as I said, this is the online series, and we have been busy this year. We've been to Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and 2 events in England where we've continued this discussion about regeneration, what's going on our high streets and in our town centres. And we've had some absolutely fascinating discussions, tours, workshops, all sort of things, looking at how each area in the UK is doing this, which has been absolutely brilliant. And as I say, we have also had 4 talks already. So this is the 5th of 6. We've only got 1 left after Malcolm today, which is next Thursday. So Thursday next week is the last talk. And then we're halfway through December, which is just crazy. So today we are going to be talking to Malcolm about community and cultural regeneration. And Malcolm is by trade an architect. He's Scottish, as you'll soon find out with the accent as well. And he's got involved in quite a lot of different community schemes and things like that. So he certainly knows what he's talking about, definitely, like all of our other speakers as well. So it's going to be very interesting to hear from Malcolm today, based on all the experience that he's got. So that's just a little bit about Malcolm there. But as always, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Please don't forget, if you haven't booked the last talk, make sure you get booked into that. That's going to be another absolutely fascinating talk. And if you could just pop into the chat box as well, who you are and where you're from, just so that Bev can tick you off as well. And of course, it's a nice way to network as well, so you can find out who else is on the call. And obviously, you know, if you want to connect with that person, send them a little message. That's what the network is all about. But Malcolm, are you ready to rock and roll with your presentation, please, sir?
I am.
Oh, yes, he's definitely ready. Fantastic.
Can you see me? We
can see you. Yeah, we can hear you too.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to be here. Thank you for your introduction, Hannah. Well, I can't see the right-hand side because my face is in the way, so I hope you can all see the whole width of it there. I'm really here because I was commissioned, wrote, led and delivered the Scottish Government's Town Centre Review 10 years ago now. And it's interesting the way the landscape's changed. There's now a whole load of town centre professionals, which is good. But I also sometimes worry that we are kind of world-class about talking about stuff and writing reports and running seminars. All these are good things, but we sometimes forget that we actually need to do these things on the ground. And I think the reason I was invited to lead the Scottish Government's review is because I had a track record of doing things on the ground. So I sort of want to talk about that first. And first of all, I have to introduce you to my big town now. Obviously, Edinburgh is a city, but all the principles that work for small towns, for villages, for anything that's has elements of a centre are the same as for cities. That's Edinburgh. I've probably done in my long career a couple of hundred jobs on that slide. I'm going to talk about a few of the larger ones, but there's something as well about being part of a place and thinking about a place and caring for it. I work all over Scotland, in the north of England and elsewhere, but the place I know best is Edinburgh. I used to play in bands in the venues, be members of arts organisations, take part in community events, support communities, all these sorts of things. So having people who know and care about a place is really important. And I took three things principally that I'd learned from actually also being an architect in this place, and I took them into the review. And the first is the importance of cultural regeneration, and what I've been able to do with Edinburgh just through being a member of, for instance, a poetry library. And when the lottery money first came on stream, it was wonderful because it didn't bully you and hector you about what you're supposed to do with it. It was just very simple and open. And organisations I've been part of, we made some of the first applications and were successful. So we built a little poetry library in the old town, the world's first national purpose-built poetry library. It's a wonderful thing to have. We built the world's first storytelling centre, and we really understood storytelling as being a freestanding art form. It's not literature, it's not theatre. There's something in between, and to do somewhere on the Royal Mile in the heart of the old town for that was really resonant and special, with theatre and storytelling spaces and courts, etc. And then the largest of my projects at that time, we did a National Centre for Dance on the Grass Market, big medieval space, market space within Edinburgh, just sitting underneath the castle. Found a site that the owner couldn't develop. It was a big bar group. They couldn't get fire escape. Linked it with an adjacent site owned by the council, got fire escape out to the street above, brought a new park on board, rebuilt the city wall, brought a new close through it, stitched things together. And that gave us time to go and find the funding, to write the brief, to put the whole thing together, to make somewhere that's had a great dance court in the heart of it, a glass roof sitting underneath the castle with all the heritage of Edinburgh round about, but worked with modern buildings, modern spaces, wove a set of 4 dance spaces through the building and routes through that turn corners with light falling down into the plan, and brought a cultural regeneration through those sorts of buildings. The second thing I learned is the reuse of historic buildings. And I worked for conservation practice a long time ago. And, at that time, sort of conservation was about architectural history and theory. There was something else about sustainability, was about energy and insulation, and there were other things about housing and other things about cities and towns and what they were for. They were all kind of different silos, and I've always seen them as being the same thing. And I've been advocating for my whole life the importance of positively reusing historic buildings. So with those sorts of projects, I've managed to bring lots of historic buildings alive. I'll talk about the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute later, but then next door to it, the old Infirmary Street Baths, which are now the Dovecot Tapestry Studios, and they were a swimming pool that the back had broken over the rock, wouldn't hold water anymore. There've been lots of proposals to fill it full of artist studios, which would have chopped up this lovely, great space, and finding a use that actually suited the building, these big tapestry weaving looms sit within the main former swimming pool space. The gallery above is a gallery for tapestry. There's galleries underneath. There's offices above that are let out to support the artistic endeavour. There's flats above that, piled up above the building. There's a cafe, there's a shop. It's kind of become a powerhouse for arts and crafts. And I love finding a use which is appropriate for the historic building, that doesn't kick it to bits. And then if you've got to make new bits around it, sort of enjoying contemporary architecture, but made in a way that suits the historic building, and that we use breathing insulation. We like material that moves, not modern polythene and cement mortar and those sorts of ways of working with the building. So we use natural materials, materials with integrity, and make a building move with it. And another example, this was a church which was on the building's got risk register because it was turned down for being chopped up into flats or offices. It was turned down for being turned into a theatrical venue because it's in a very pucka Georgian street. So finding a use that fitted the building as an auctioneer, an auction house, was a lovely thing. So the auctioneer stands up where the minister used to stand in the pulpit. And the congregation are now there for the auction, and we managed to even keep things like the rake in the upper gallery, because there's objects on the top, there's paintings around the lower bit, so we did a big step down on the rake, and you then get this very exciting glass balustrade at the edge to deal with that. So again, wanting to preserve the integrity and achieve spaces within the building, and finding a use that brings it alive through this cultural regeneration. More conventional conservation, like for the Bank of Scotland. This is the old Bank of Scotland headquarters. It had a mezzanine put in the great banking hall, and offices put above the mezzanine, getting that big space working again, finding a heart for the bank, making it breathe, in sustainability terms, how the air moves through the building. Didn't stop them from committing suicide during the banking crisis, but anyway, we made them a nice space before they topped themselves. And many of these are A-listed buildings, and we never see an A-listing, grade 1, obviously, in England, as being saying that you can't bring a building alive, work with its dull back elevation to open it up to a garden, to let you spill out into that garden, to turn a dowdy space into a light-filled space where you can dance outside and onto the terrace and down into the garden. So we've always had a view of historic buildings not as being some architectural history puzzle that you've got to put back to their original splendor, but to think of them as something that evolves and is about bringing them alive. So the spaces, you can move away from the sort of Victorian dark and dowdiness, and sometimes a historic space can almost feel modernist in its lightness and its connectivity. In many ways, the most significant chance we've had, this is the old Royal High School. So Walter Scott was taught here in the late 18th century. Very important historic building that had then passed to the university and had been knocked about over the years, etc. And the university commissioned us to make this their Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. So it's the place where they nurture and spin out climate change businesses, doing really important work all over the world. So it was really important for them to make a building that demonstrated how you would do this. And I hope, and they've said it's partly because I, for many years in Edinburgh, had advocated the centre of the city as being a sustainable place, our town centres as being their sustainable places, that they chose a historic building to demonstrate this in. And they asked us to try and get a BREEAM Outstanding. Some of you will know BREEAM is the main sustainability rating. Outstanding is the very top rating they can give. There's several 100,000 buildings now in Britain and elsewhere that have a BREEAM, but outstanding is really hard to get. And there had never been a BREEAM outstanding awarded to a listed building. So this would be the first if we managed to do it. And when you look on their website, I saw the extent of the challenge, because BREEAM outstanding buildings tended to be styled like green spaceships in business parks out of town, filled full of insulation foamed with cyanide, the usual nasty modern stuff, aluminium panels that they say can be recycled, etc., etc. And the idea that something like that, which will fall apart in 20 years and need replaced, is better than something like this, which is hundreds of years of use already in it and is going to last for 100 years more, is something that I felt really strongly needed to be challenged. So we worked with them and sometimes felt like we were working against BREEAM to pursue this idea of making an outstanding listed building. We worked with natural insulation. We worked with increasing the windows and particularly the roof lights to triple glazing, district heating, all that sort of thing. We opened the spaces up between the two old parts of the buildings. We got a lovely atrium which linked them all in nice simple ways, which allowed us to draw air in and through the atrium, which made the thing work. We made spaces, we said the sorts of spaces we would achieve were really the gold standard for what a modern conference type spill out office, touchdown, hot desking sort of environment should be. There was no reason why, because it was a historic building, it should be any worse. So we achieved all these things, and we also had to fight BREEAM to say that the fact you could walk to it from the station, that there was a park out the back that was connected to all these other university institutes and important buildings, that so people could walk between them, that the Parliament was near, that Dynamic Earth was near, that this all meant the thing was walkable and far less impact on the environment by doing that. And we won that. And I love to show this because basically what I'm saying is that this isn't the way forward. This is the shock of the old, that's this 1777 building is cutting edge, contemporary sustainability, and exactly what we should be doing if we're going to have any chance to fight issues around climate change. And then the third thing that I brought to the table is community empowerment. And my first job after university, I worked in a place called Wester Hailes. If I say it's a scheme, anyone who's Scottish here will know what that means. It's a big council housing suburb. 17,000 people live there. There was no jobs there. It was big dormitory. It's suffered all the sort of deprivations you could expect. But I worked there as a community architect. We built stuff for the community. We built businesses, offices, etc. And I've been involved ever since with working with small local arts and community organisations, finding buildings for them, scrapping for funding, understanding that is far better when communities step up than government tells people how to act, etc. That's always been an important thing to me, and I think is another of the reasons that I was picked to take this thing forward. And it's quite interesting when I talk about that sort of community empowerment. Going back to my cultural regeneration, I was a few years after I delivered the review, I was at a conference on arts and culture and regeneration, and a city council official who I'd never met got up and he talked quite forcefully about how Edinburgh had done all these things through cultural regeneration. And he had a list of 8 buildings that he introduced to us, and every single one of them was mine. And every single one of them, at best, the council had shrugged their shoulders when we brought the proposal forward. At worst, they had fought us tooth and nail when we were trying to build them. They'd said, what's a poetry library? No one ever builds a poetry library. They'd said, storytelling, what's storytelling? We don't need something for storytelling. They'd said tapestry weaving is not part of our arts intention, that dancing is maybe important, but it's not something we're actively pursuing. And each time they told us, you know, if we wanted to bring our initiative into their big plans, then we could do that. And their big plans were a huge arts district on Princess Street, or a £60 million literature centre at the top of the Royal Mile. Now, all these things, none of these things have happened, and all my 8 have. So there's an argument about the value of top down and bottom up, and I would suggest that bottom up is often far better tuned and does things far better than top down. That's not to say that top down isn't important, and I'm going to continue telling you all the sorts of things I think that city councils, that government can do to enable that sort of dual approach, top down and bottom up, along the way. So if that's what I think I was engaged for, that's what I brought to the review, I'll start to talk about, the review itself. And there's 2 principles that I brought to the review, and 3 assertions I'd like to make on behalf of towns. The 2 principles were, first, well, looking at my Edinburgh, is it's not about shopping. And we had the advantage of following on from Mary Portis's review, which had reported a couple of years beforehand, and it was all about shopping, and it was all about hanging baskets and innovative local shops and things. And you know, that's all good. And in fact, I should say it's not just about shopping, because clearly shopping is part of town centres, but it's really foolish to just fixate on shopping as being one part. And we know that shopping is changing. More people are buying online. We know that people will still want the personal interaction, the social interaction that being in the shop, that interacting with people in the shop brings. But the nature of shopping changes, and if town centres are thought to only rely on shops, they will die. Town centres are integrated things that have all different sorts of things in them. I've had another version of that kind of single issue thinking with Visit Scotland, and a few years after I produced the Town Centre Review, I had a fairly distressing conference I was at, organised by the City of Edinburgh Council and Visit Scotland, which was just kind of shouting at us Edinburgh residents, people who live in the beautiful centre of the city, that we've just got to get out our city and give it up and hand it over to Airbnb, that is the way forward for Edinburgh to grow the tourism economy, and we didn't want any local people there at all. And it was kind of jaw-dropping, because you know, I go and visit beautiful foreign cities, and the last thing I want is to be surrounded by nobody but people like me visiting that city. And in any case, cities are nothing without the people who make them. They are our places. They belong to us. It's our heritage, often our ancestors who built them and made them what they are. And they will die if they just become monocultural, whether for shopping, whether for business, whether for tourism. So what we need to know about cities, it's not just about any one thing. It's a strength of diversity, that you want someone to go to a gym there, and to go to a cafe when they leave, and then sit in a park maybe before they go home, and for someone to work there and to use facilities and go to a museum at lunch or a gallery, or people to live there. To have people living in a place brings footfall to a place. Any big city, whether it's a tourist hotspot like Edinburgh and known for its beauty, or whether it's just an ordinary wee country town, having people living there, using the facilities, that's kind of bottom line. And that, our second principle, which is directly connected to that, is footfall is God. Having people there, visiting, using multiple facilities is absolutely the bottom line thing. So we then went to our 3 assertions, and again, and it's a bit nasty of me, but I used Mary Portis's review to kind of say what we should do different. In that was all saying, no, sort of subjective things. Cities are nice, towns are nice, town centres are nice, high streets are nice, people like them. I wanted to find some objective truths behind that and use them to build a commercial case, not just a heritage case or a niceness case. I wanted to build an objective case on the commercial necessity of the social things that we find in cities. So the first of them is, just like with buildings, that we reusing an old town is the same as reusing an old building. It's got the infrastructure there. It's got the well-made, culturally considered structure there. So I've fought my time, and apologies, this is still Edinburgh. Proposals like this is an enormous greenbelt buster in Edinburgh. There's a centre of the town behind, and there's the greenbelt buster, which is all about making money out of cheap farmland and exploiting that, etc. And of course, once built, that would require us to find public money to build the schools, to build the hospitals, to put the sewers in, to put the infrastructure in, to pay for the buses to go out there, all that sort of stuff. Whereas Edinburgh has this blasted waterfront that has schools, that has sewers, that has roads, has buses go through it. We're paying to find uses for as they moulder, and we should invest in those places before we bust the green belt, etc. And in all of this, I hope you'll excuse me, we have the usual sort of greenwash goes on in Scotland, in that we have multiple proposals for eco-towns, eco-villages, and often they have some sort of support from Prince, now King Charles, that they've got pediments, that they look vaguely historic, that they have free bikes, no UPVC and whatever. But they're all basically based on building on farmland and sucking all the middle-class money out the nearest old town, out of Motherwell, out of Falkirk, out of Perth, out of wherever. So the money doesn't get invested in regenerating these existing places, but goes onto some farmland and allows our volume house builders and the farmers that they collaborate with to make vast sums of money and take them offshore into offshore trusts, etc. So just to finish on that, my assertion is that sustainable places, we've kind of got to a place where we understand that retrofitting old buildings is absolutely the critical thing we need to do for climate change, also for cultural continuity, all those sorts of things too. So I'd suggest that towns, old towns and old cities are exactly the same. We need to retrofit old towns and old cities. So that's kind of the first law and assertion I made on behalf of cities, towns and cities. The second of them was what we've learned from, there's all sorts of chat about creativity, and the rise of the creative class is a sort of seminal work that people living in urban places are the sort who are artistically innovative, exchange ideas, all that sort of thing. And for me, there's something that tips over into well-being. That's Edinburgh again. That was my cycle to work at the time. I saw the castle. I cycled through the park. I relaxed as I got to work, and I even used to meet a couple of people who had buildings or wanted to employ me or talk to me about this and that and whatever. So they're commercial places too. Creativity and commercial innovation work together. That's all this creative class thing. I was at a dinner and I met someone I was at school with who's now a lawyer, and I hadn't seen him in 40 years. After 40 years, the first thing he said to me, and this is a very Edinburgh thing, the first thing he said to me was, "So Fraser, what's your commute like?" And I said, "Oh, well, I've got a 10-minute cycle across the park." And he said, "Bloody green nonsense," and stalked off. And I was sort of left floundering and, thinking of all the things I could say to him now about it being cheaper, it being faster, yes, it being greener, but actually it was better for business too, because I was part of the city and I was meeting clients and I was meeting fellow professionals and exchanging information, etc. So I told him that when I met him again. I also like how all that ties in, sticking with Edinburgh again. The Enlightenment happened in Edinburgh, This is, people say this is where the modern world was first set out. Philosophers like David Hume, James Hutton, the geologist, Adam Smith, the economist, all those sorts of people. That all happened in Edinburgh because of Scotland's education system, but also because the old town of Edinburgh has that interactivity, it has that creativity. There's lots of liminal spaces between public, semi-public, semi-private, private courts where people met each other. All that sort of thing that towns bring us, that urban living bring us, that regeneration can bring us, comes from that. And then the last thing that I underpinned the study with is the idea of democratic places. And this is in Crieff in Perthshire, a lovely rural town. And Perth and Kinross Council closed down all the public buildings in Crieff and built a so-called community campus way out the edge of Crieff on farmland, co-located everything there. And I had a lovely letter from the Crieff Community Trust who said, off like the old police building there on the right, not only do we now need to knock that building about to try and find a new use to it, also the local shops lose because the policemen don't buy their lunch there anymore. And most importantly for us, actually many people who would want to use a police station are old folk who don't have a car, who can't get to your new community campus, or young people who again aren't able to get to this new community campus. So it's the idea that towns are places where people have democratic access, that you can walk places, you can get a bus, to complain, to borrow a book from the library. It isn't a world that is entirely based on access to a car. And those of us who make decisions usually have a car. We're usually the sort of economic class that does, but there's a whole load of people in Britain who don't have access to a car. And for them, the traditional city is the thing that works best. So that was my sort of key principles and assertions that underlay the review. And I'm now going to go on to talk about the achievements of the review, what we managed to do. And I'm just realising as I've said that I've not put in something about Scotland's Towns Partnership, which is an organisation we created to take these things forward, is really important. STP, if you want to look that up. But as well as the achievements, it was made clear to me by government that I wouldn't be able to do everything I wanted. So there's a whole load of stuff that I'm continuing to lobby for, and I'm hoping I and others are still changing, and I'm going to note them along the way. And we brought 6 proposals to the table, or 6 areas that we wanted to see developed. And the first, and quite possibly most important, is town centre living. That people, it's this idea of footfall, that people need to get back to enjoying living in places, enjoying the amenity of them. So actually, the more people leave town centres, city centres, the more bars and rowdiness moves in, and it just becomes a place for a hoolie of an evening. So the more people living in a place, the more people care for it, the more people go to local shops and bars and look after place, etc. And though these things are changing anyway, it's not anything really we've achieved, but we're just swimming in the right direction. So this is a big old linen works that we've been part of retrofitting in Dunfermline and bringing people back to live. And that's huge numbers of people on this large site come back to live near the centre of town, help keep it alive, help keep its shops and bars alive. We've also been involved in little sites, just little backland, scrubby sites, inputting modern housing into it. And when we're not working with retrofit in old buildings, we like to think about what new vernacular might be, and we build with, this is heavy timber, so this is cross-laminated timber, no polythene, no arsenic, no cyanide. Most modern buildings are full of arsenic and cyanide. You wouldn't believe it. So we try and make healthy modern buildings when we're doing these sorts of things. The next thing I wanted to think about is empty homes, though, going back to retrofit. It's just unbelievable the number of empty homes there are in Britain. And in Scotland, we think there may be 80,000 registered homes, long-term empty. And the number in England will be 10 times that. So it might be 800,000 or up to 1 million empty and unused during a housing crisis. So one of the things I was able to do through the review was assist empty homes initiatives in Scotland. Shelter runs the Scotland's one. Every local authority is supposed to have an empty homes officer. Some don't. I'm still trying to push for everyone to have that. But over and above that, it's quite a strange thing to think of, but all the empty homes, all the empty flats above our shops in our high street are not even in those totals, because most of them are registered as commercial or business, them being above shops. So like in Perth, the centre of Perth, the two principal shopping streets, there was over 100 empty flats. That's in 2013 over shop premises. So when you add the whole of that to Scotland, you've got another 100,000. When you add the whole of that to the whole of Britain, you've got another 1 million lying empty. And you know, in somewhere like Perth, there's currently a affordable homes initiative in Perth, which is kind of wanting to put diddy boxes on a field outside the ring road. So, you know, everyone will have to have a car, everyone will have to drive everywhere, etc. Each one of these will cost 240,000 before the land cost is taken into account. If you did the same 100 in the high street, they would cost, well, we don't know. That's part of the problem, that you would need to employ architects and surveyors and small builders. And of course, the diddy boxes are built by volume house builders who lobby the government, who the government loves, who think that a cleared site, just give us more green belt. You hear it all the time in politics, particularly in Westminster politics. Whereas we should be putting those 100 homes back over the shops in the high street. There's only one local authority in Scotland who has an empty homes officer that actually looks at empty shops. So I'm trying to push a model that looks at commercial property, empty commercial property too, on high streets, that also looks at uniting 100 empty flats. That could make student housing. Instead of building a new student block to have students on the high street would be a good thing, or that would be of interest to a housing association to give them that many. If their average cost is 50,000, that's a fifth of what a new diddy box would cost out past the ring road. People wouldn't have to have a car, all those positive things that it would bring. So there's huge issues around homes and town centre living that need developed. And as I say, I'm pushing this town centre homes model with Scotland's Towns Partnership. And the rest is the dreaded VAT. And I first started a campaign in 2003 through building design for flat VAT, because it's absolutely crackers that we knock a house down, we build a new one, and that's on the left. There's an old house that's been left to rot on Barra in the Outer Hebrides. You build a new one behind, it's 0 rated. If you repaired that house, it would be 20% VAT. So, of course, that's an enormous economic lever that's been won by the big volume house builders to encourage knocking things down, leaving town centres behind, building new diddy box suburbs on the outskirts. And putting that right is an enormous task. I was friendly with dear departed Alistair Darling, and I thought I nearly won the argument with him, but Gordon Brown slapped him down. The 2003, when we first did it, we got to Prescott, who was Deputy Prime Minister, but I think Brown as Chancellor again slapped him down. And it's just that big government likes big house builders, big funders who like a cleared site and like building in fields. We need to win that argument. And there's an organisation like Mid-Steeple Quarter in Dumfries who are doing fantastic work with bringing people back to empty closes behind the high street in Dumfries. There are exemptions on VAT, which the government will tell you need to be exploiting, but they have are paying a lot of money for a VAT consultant to try and work them out. And they have 4 different sorts of VAT regime going on the one small piece of regeneration they're doing there. The red tape, the complexity is ridiculous. Even on simple things, if you reduce the tax on repair, you would actually be making more money, because repair is very labor hungry as opposed to material hungry. So you create employment, so more people pay income tax, so it swells the coffers from taxation to be prioritizing retrofit repair in front of new builds. So it's a kind of multi-win situation for that sort of thing. And then we also have to, in terms of cities, we have to consider social diversity. That top right are 600 social homes that their social landlord in Glasgow wants to demolish. And that's my pal Frank, bottom right. He lives on the 20th floor of one of them, loves living there. He's a labourer. He says he's got a lovely short walk down the River Kelvin into his work in town. He's a bird spotter. He spots all sorts of herons and kingfishers and things like that. But because it's a lovely part of town, the social landlord wants to knock it down, because instead of 600, and they have all sorts of people, there's teachers, there's carers, there's bus drivers, there's even some Buddhist monks live there. There's all sorts live there, but of course they're ordinary people with low incomes, social rent, working class. That's not what gentrification tells us we should be aiming for in cities. So if you knock 600 of those homes down, you can build 300 mid-market rent and make more money out of raising the rent on them. So I'm fighting the government on that, who tell us about their net zero credentials and their retrofit credentials, but allow them to be bullied by social landlords like the Wheatley Group there. So the next thing that I brought through the Town Centre Review in terms of achievements and challenges is vibrant local economies. And something I didn't manage to achieve then, but I'm still working on, is the idea of land value capture, how to fund infrastructure. So this is my Edinburgh again. Edinburgh's going to expand. People want to live there, out into the countryside, my green stars. And it also has these ex-industrial waterfront areas, which the council is changing the designation on from light industrial and business to residential and mixed use. And whenever these things happen, the council allows these things to happen, the land values there jump by up to a factor of 10. And it means speculators, landowners, farmers, and their agents make enormous amounts of money. All the value is stripped out the site and taken offshore. Winston Churchill put forward and supported this idea of land value capture. Indeed, it's how we built the new town in Edinburgh and how we built the new towns throughout Britain, where if you change the designation of land, the council is allowed to buy land, existing use value, and use the rise in value of the land to invest in the infrastructure to make it happen. House builders even like it, because it means that they can build without the drip of Section 75s. I think it's Section 106 in England. So it gives them more certainty about how they can invest. It's a great thing to do, but there are some people who regarded it as dangerously socialist. Winston Churchill, dangerously socialist. It's a great idea, and it's great for, works in leafy Edinburgh, but also works in poorer sites and sites of social deprivation. That's the northeast of Glasgow on the right. And at the moment, if the government invests in a railway station, a railway stop, or invests in putting expensive piece of infrastructure into an area like that, the hope value leaps all around. The people whose site was worth £1 now rub their hands and say, well, we're not selling out, we're not selling for more than £1 million, and places become undevelopable again. So land value capture means that the council can invest in that rise through the initiative of government in investing in a place and put the infrastructure and build the schools, build hospitals, put the sewerage in, make it all work. So that's something I continue to push for. And I also push for enterprising communities, and that's one of the places where we did have great achievement, because I was able to feed into the Community Empowerment Act, which came in 2 years later, and that allows local communities in Scotland, rural, urban, all sorts, to get their hands on empty council buildings, empty bits of land, etc., and develop them. And I managed to deliver the first urban community asset transfer in Scotland. There'd been a few rural ones before then, but this is Bridgend Farmhouse, and it sits in the middle of 2 areas of multiple deprivation in the south of Edinburgh, and it's just done fantastic things since. They built their own extensions and venues. During lockdown, they sent out, I think it was about 110,000 free meals to old folks in the communities around them. They do tremendous training and growing sorts of things in the local community. I'm doing work in small towns. This is in Biggar with the youth project on an old auction house building, working with a community nursery in Edinburgh, and doing these sorts of asset transfers all over. But something I'm pushing on through that is that the trouble is, you set up the Community Empowerment Act and the government asks lawyers to write the legislation that implements it. And we now have a situation where if a community wants to get their hands on a bit of land, even if the council is willing, whereas it's a simple legal piece of transaction, land transaction, the Community Empowerment Act makes them employ what's in Scotland called an advocate, and what's in England called a barrister. You need to employ the most expensive legal assistance. So like on the wee nursery I was showing you, they spent 4 years because the barrister made a mistake, so they had to do it again. And he's been paid about 10 times what I've been paid to fully design the building, to take it through. So it's just one of these things. Most good things that happen, if government enacts legislation, lawyers get their hands on it and make it as difficult as possible. So it needs lawyers to untangle it. I'm sure there might be some lawyers who might take issue with what I'm saying, but I'd be pleased to be challenged on that too. I also made proposals around accessible public services, and in particular, I suggested that councils like that one in Crieff, I showed you, shouldn't take services out of towns and out of cities and put them in community campuses outside the town, that they should group them together and use them as tools towards regeneration. And one of the really important principles we managed to enact into legislation is the Town Centre First principle, which is that you shouldn't do something in the green belt, do something outside the town if there is space for doing it inside the town. Now, I've had to rely on local authorities to enact that fully. So there are a couple of local authorities that have written into legislation, like Aberdeenshire. Every council decision needs to refer to the importance of investing first in the towns. Have you checked that this investment can't go to a town centre use, etc.? And again, I've also been able in my own architectural work to assist with that. This is Orkney Islands Council in the Northern Isles, that they were going to close down the police station and the library from their second town, Stromness. That's a very, very beautiful historic town up in mainland in Orkney. They were going to move them out of Stromness, but were persuaded that if they grouped them together with the district registrar and devolved some social services jobs from Kirkwall, the capital, they could run the services cheaper, all grouped at the pierhead, at the where the ferries come in. They would help regenerate the high street, the town centre from it. So that was council's thinking around those town centre issues that I've introduced. And then proactive planning. You can't see the top of this, but this is I've worked with the Scottish Land Commission to try and introduce a new form of, it would allow councils to try and move land back into out of stalled sites and make things happen. I've been trying to assist in making compulsory sales orders more prevalent, where councils can actually assemble land in the town centre that's just being sat on basically by owners. But a compulsory sales order, which has now been introduced, where council can force a bit of land that volume house builder's been sitting on waiting for the value to rise, can force it to market to reduce that value, or can force little sites in the town centre to be sold to try and assemble larger ones to do innovative housing or whatever, and that's come on board. So that's, and just to get the time, and I think this is my second last slide, so I think I'm right in stopping. So these are the two, really the two things I've been talking about and tried to bring forward. On the left, the principles that underlay the review, and on the right, the levers that I've either been able to introduce through the review or continue to lobby for. In Scotland, there's a think tank called the Commonweal, which has a great deal of success in lobbying government over social and economic affairs, that I'm the board convener of, chair of in English, and I've been able to do some of that with the Commonweal. So thank you for the opportunity to pull all that together and to present it to you, and I look forward to hearing some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Do I stop sharing, Hannah, or what?
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Mark.
I've stopped hearing you though. Can you hear me?
I think Hannah's has frozen there.
She has.
She's snowed in Cumbria, and probably it's got to the internet finally. So,
Beverly,
I'll
have you
wait
been?
for it to... Sorry,
have you
go
been,
on, Malcolm.
Have you been monitoring the chat?
I have, yeah. I don't think we've got any questions so far, but has anybody got any burning questions for Malcolm at the moment while we wait for Hannah to log back in? I know she's always got some questions.
do you want to stop sharing again, Malcolm, so that
Yep.
we can see everybody? That's great.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to.
Have I argued you all into submission? I see Scott Mackay from the Mid-Steeple Quarter. Nice to see him there. So they're doing all that great work in Dumfries and having the issues with VAT that I discussed.
Somebody must have a question. I know there was a lot of information there. It was a great presentation, Malcolm. Oh, Bill's unmuted himself, I think. Or we can't hear you, Bill. On my list, it says you've unmuted, but we definitely can't hear you. Maybe if you type your question into the chat. And Gateway Studio say, how difficult have you found getting the local authority to take arts and culture as a priority, Malcolm?
Well, there's 32 local authorities in Scotland, so it's 32 different sorts of difficulty, and some are alive to the possibilities, and some, as I said about Edinburgh when I was being critical about them, they'd made their decisions about what arts and culture. It had gone through the democratic process. It had taken 4 years to get to this idea of an arts hub somewhere, and they couldn't understand where these other things were coming from. So I think it's something that local authorities need to learn, to be opportunistic and to be supportive of when other ideas come towards them. So it's always helpful if you don't criticize your local authority too much, like I've just been doing about mine, but you go to them with a certain amount of humility and try and find ways in to discuss your particular initiative. And given the way that funding is for local authorities, as for everyone, most local authorities now are very keen if people come to them with ideas. And certainly Edinburgh now and other local authorities are actively wanting to get rid of assets because they just see existing buildings and small theatres and things like that as being a drain on them. So if communities can come forward and make them work, that's great. Which makes me worry on occasion, because some of them are going to fail at some point, and they're going to, if a local community puts their heart and soul into something and it just becomes their financial headache rather than their council's financial headache, that's a little difficult, and it's going to happen at some point. But I am very convinced that local communities do these things better because they know what works for their community, and they're closer to the ground, and they tend to have energy for it. So it's a good thing to happen for whatever reason.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Malcolm. I can see Hannah's back. Welcome back, Hannah.
Sorry.
Bill, if I just read out Bill's comment, then I'll hand right back to you. Bill was trying to speak, but we couldn't hear him. But he said that the case studies and examples are very valuable for those setting up, and access to such would be useful, such as Granton-on-Spey.
Well, I know Granton and Spain. I love it. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. I was up in Aberdeenshire. We've got a few studies on our website. Equally, they're not kind of detailed financial things. And Scotland does have a good infrastructure now of consultants and economic and community consultants in particular. Community enterprises in Falkirk are particularly good, Bill. I don't know if you know them, but they are very good, and they give that they give free advice for people and do a bit of financial leverage to get communities going. So that's kind of helpful for them. We're also doing a lot of, and I maybe should have talked about it, local place plans are coming in Scotland, and the individual communities are encouraged to do work on suggesting what changes they want to see, what buildings should become available, what parts of the community are ready for growth. Is there a nursery that's looking for somewhere? Is there a vacant council building, etc.? And we're doing, for tiny amounts of money, we're doing quite a lot across the borderlands, the south of Scotland, and we've done a bit up in Angus and Aberdeenshire too. So I don't know where Granton and Spey is with that sort of thing, but that it'd be helpful to talk to community enterprises, do other sorts of things.
Wonderful. Thank you, Malcolm. Apologies, I dropped out there at the worst time ever. I was talking to myself for a few minutes and then realised that you'd all left. I'd left you, so thank you. John Dyson has just put into that for you, Bill, into the chat about DTAS and COS. So I've just put the links into the website chat for you, so you can have a look at those. But I will put those onto the email that we send out afterwards to you all anyway, just so you can use those to refer to if that's helpful for anybody. Bill's put his thumb up. Fabulous. Thank you. And Community Enterprise are a member of the network. So Bev has also put the link in there for that as well for you. So brilliant. So hopefully that answered your question, Bill. But if there's anything else, please shout up. No problem at all. Good. Fabulous. Is there any other questions at all for Malcolm? I don't know if we did any before I got lost. But one of my questions was very much, obviously, you've had a wide experience over the past 10 years. You've obviously been involved in a lot of heritage buildings, but what did you find probably the most challenging of all of those projects, and why?
I can't think what's the most challenging. I mean, there are projects which require a lot of patience along the way. I talked about the community nursery I was doing, where the advocate between the advocate and the council, they've messed up the asset transfer and it's had to be gone through a second time. And that's allowed, there's one member of the community is an objector, and he's making our life very difficult. It is a funny thing about democracy that it's not that, in terms of local politics, it's not that if more people want it than don't want it, it happens. It's that actually you have to have everyone who wants it, because if one person doesn't want it, then it becomes very, very difficult. So that's been challenging. The dance space project I talked about in a bit more detail was challenging because we kind of knew there was a reason that Scottish and Newcastle Brewers couldn't sell that site. But it took us 3 years to raise the money from the lottery. And several times during that process, they were taken over by someone else who would then look at this great resource and say, let's sell it, let's sell it. And we had to prove again to them that they couldn't actually get fire escape, and the resource had no value for anyone else but us. So all sorts of projects have all sorts of challenges, but when you're working with communities and these funny bits of funding and these difficult applications, the thing you need most is patience.
And we do tell projects a lot of the time about that, because as you say, sometimes it is frustration after frustration, and you just get knocked back after knocked back, and it is very disheartening, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as you say,
So,
it's patience.
Another answer would be that the Bridgend farmhouse that I talked about was quite a challenge, because at that point, and Edinburgh was very supportive, at that point, the community empowerment legislation hadn't been enacted. So not only were we the first, but we were relying on legislation which wasn't there yet to persuade the council. And we also had to do the first analysis of the value of, the council had a £250,000 bid for the farmhouse. We needed to show that they would gain much more than the £250,000 by passing it to the community, because they would run all these courses. They would cut down the crime in the neighbourhood. They would bring people into into good economic use who would be otherwise not have a job or whatever. So we had to sort of create all these ways of measuring things, which are now far more mainstream. So it's when you're doing things for the first time, they're always difficult. So maybe that was the most challenging of jobs in that sort of way.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know obviously you brought up BREEAM as well, and obviously sustainability is a huge thing that's going on nowadays, especially with restoring buildings and even obviously building new ones. But obviously not everybody gets involved in BREEAM, but is there any kind of advice you could give anybody online now as to how to kind of approach it?
There's so many different measures now, and there's a whole profession growing up around carbon counting as well at the moment. I just wish all these things could be made simpler, and I sometimes think that the best you can do is kind of feel what is the right thing for this building. You know, you look at some recent buildings, and basically because they're built of rubbish and they're falling apart, the idea of conserving them and thinking that this is sustainability is just not the case. And we should be more concerned nowadays with our new buildings being long-term, sustainable, reusable, solid, with integrity, etc. Whereas actually what we build is very flimsy and full of plastic and chemicals. So there are a lot of different ways of looking at sustainability. I wish that government could create a single one which is more integrates carbon, longevity, cultural value, healthy materials, etc. I worry, for instance, about the growth of the passive house, because that's just one sort of thing that's needed for a building. There's EnerFit as well for, which is passive house for existing buildings. So, but airtightness is only one part of a kind of rainbow of positive things that we need to look at for buildings and we need to consider. And I feel the building regulations should be focused on a more simple set of measures which value the healthiness and the lack of waste in whether we should repair, renew, or replace buildings. So I'd love to get to that someday.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? A nice simple model and everything like that. Everything's fun. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Is there any other questions? If anybody would like to unmute themselves as well, please feel free to ask Malcolm something rather than obviously in the chat box. If there's anybody else has got any questions. No. Wonderful. So we have got permission to be able to circulate the presentation afterwards, and as per all the other ones, we will be putting these all online, all these recorded talks for you, but we won't be doing that until after the last talk, which is next Thursday. So then we're going to be working on that. So we should get those all live for you on the Heritage Trust Network website by the end of the year for you all. So you can obviously refer to these presentations again. But wonderful. Thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. And if there is any other questions that people think of afterwards, please get in touch with us. We can always forward those questions over. And we have also put Malcolm's website address in there as well. So if you want to go and have a look at the projects he's been involved in through his architect firm, please take a look. And we'll also put those on the website as well.